Support Committee. It is January 17th, 2018, and we are calling the meeting to order. Okay. First item on the agenda, and I guess we can still do this because I have the minutes of the, okay, public comment. Heinz?
Yes.
Public comment? Not yet.
This is my first meeting really to attend, and it's interesting to sit on this side of it. I think that's how I'll start off. But I do want to relay, I spoke to Dan Pelletier this morning. He would have planned to normally be here, he will plan to be here in the future. And I'll maybe mention some more things later that he and I spoke about. Basically, it runs along the lines of getting information for you, or perhaps, knowing something that we as a group don't know yet, but he's been at many of these meetings with Chris and Chatham, and so he started to go into it. I said, I can't talk more, but I'll relay that now, and he plans to be here at future meetings.
All right, great. All right, since Chris Clark isn't here, I don't know if he's going to show up later. I thought he might. If he does, we can do an update from the town administrator.
You're skipping number 3?
Oh, all right, number 3, approval of minutes. The three of us, I guess it's only going to be the three of us that would do that.
I have a few extra copies if anybody, I don't think they got sent to you because,
Yeah, I have that too. So
Yeah,
that's,
no, it's on,
that's what
but
went on.
we won't vote on it since we
Yeah.
weren't members at that time.
Yeah. All right. So did you two have a chance to look them, well, you put them together. I didn't change anything.
I didn't have a chance to review them.
All right,
so why
so
don't we move it till next meeting?
we'll move it to next meeting.
Okay, on that note, if I could, who's taking today's minutes?
Oh, we need somebody to act as clerk today.
Chris?
Chris?
He really isn't a member yet, so
Oh.
I will volunteer, just as long as it doesn't, put me in that role
All
without
right.
discussion at a future time.
All right,
So,
okay.
thank you.
Continuity.
All right.
So, Madam Chairman,
Yes,
if I could just, before we go any further, maybe we just make it clear that our understanding is that Chris and I were appointed last night by the Board of Selectmen, but have not received our official letters and have not been sworn in. So we're sort of here as observers, non-voting members at the moment. We'd expect that would get rectified in the next couple of days. So, just so the public knows.
And if I could, on that note, I don't know if it's on here. Is it on here for election of officers? I guess not.
no, because,
So I guess we would move that till we have a full committee.
yes. That's why I didn't put it on. Speaking of the next meeting, we were planning that on Tuesday, the 23rd, which is next Tuesday. The time we'll discuss during this meeting. It's either going to be 8 or 8:30. Okay. All right, old business, the town meeting issues, kind of lumped together with that East Harwich sewer project, which we attended last evening. That's old business, and actually, I guess what was covered last night is new business. So I don't know what we want to do as far as the town issues in the East Harwich project. I know we discussed that, and we had talked about having, what we were called, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I would think we would follow the agenda down one at a time and see if anybody has anything to say on town meeting issues that might have come up. I mean, since the meeting was just last night, we probably haven't formulated conclusions from that, but somebody may have input. And also, I saw new member Chris Harlow taking some very good notes from last night. And I was wondering if, I have some notes, I was wondering perhaps if we could send our compilations of questions from the public to Chris, and perhaps he could eliminate the repetition and prepare us just a sheet of questions from the public from last night for next meeting.
You mean Chris Clark, or do you mean?
I mean Chris Harlow.
Okay.
If he would be so kind as to perform that service.
Yes, I would.
She has a very subtle way of it.
Do we have contact information for everybody on the committee?
No, I said I was going to send, I have everybody's, so I will get that together and send it out.
Great.
Yeah, I will do that. Because I have everybody's email and I believe phone number. If not, I'll contact you.
I took last night's meeting pretty seriously, and I thought the public was really engaged. I won't make a comment about the PowerPoint and all that, but I think if we could, and I wrote down 10 questions that kind of summarized for me what the people were asking from the floor. And from my perspective, if we could answer those 10 questions over and over and over again in various forms, I think the public outreach part would be very well served.
Are you going to include those 10?
Yes.
Good. All right.
And I would add to Chris's comment that, you know, over the next couple of meetings, as we define our role, we only have 3 months between now and May 7th. So I think we have to, you know, there's a million things we might like to do, but I think we really have to identify what we're going to try to do between now and the middle of April to prepare for town meeting. And maybe it is just those 10 questions and some neighborhood outreach or something. But whatever it is, I think we need to closely define it.
I think the PowerPoint comment that I would have was that having additional visual representations of the housing would have been helpful, because so many of the people in town have access from the back only, not the front. And that's a very different issue in terms of cost. And I also think that it would be worthwhile, in addition to the questions, having some very tangible specifics that will need to be addressed with engineers in the future. We're not talking about professionals here who've done this kind of bidding of work in the past. It's very, very different. And managing a bid like that is well beyond the experience of many homeowners. And I think the conception to date has been that the town would be more or less coming to people and telling them what's going to happen from the curb to the back, and that's not accurate. So there needs to be a little bit more assistance in that area.
I think that you mentioned what can we get done between now and town meeting. I think it's important for us also to keep our eye on the ball and say, look, that's the starting point, getting to town meeting. That's a vote to get us to the next stage. But this group, hopefully, in its support work, is going to continue on, maybe move from East Harwich to the next zone, wherever, you know, next phase, whatever. So I tend to take a more long-term look at it. Maybe for our next meeting, what we need to do is have a calendar that just identifies what meetings we propose to have. And then maybe we start saying, okay, at this meeting, the topic will be this, and we'll invite Fred in, you know, that kind of stuff, and try and do that as we work through all these things. Of course, all that's flexible. You know, we can change things as we need to, but if we get organized about what we want to try and get done. You know, the other thing is that you think about it, and what I heard last night, homeowners seeking information. I mean, this is something new to them, because now it's coming onto their property. Okay, they can deal with, okay, we're ripping up the roads like the gas company is, and, you know, people equate that, okay, I kind of get it, there's going to be a cop maybe, and, you know, some detour and all that kind of stuff. But what does it mean when it comes onto my house, and what is my financial impact?
Yeah.
And what are my responsibilities? So you kind of look at that and say, well, how can you help them do that? Well, the cartoons last night were okay. I will say that one of the problems there was the screen was way in the back of the stage. It
Couldn't
was
see
like,
it.
I felt like I was in the bleachers at Fenway Park, even though I was in the second row or something, you know, so that was kind of
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
So some of that needs to get, you know, to get worked on. I think that what I heard last night, beyond general information, is that these homeowners want to be able to talk to somebody one-on-one, or, you know, come before this group, you know, feel like an individual. This is my situation, you know, how can you help me? Because when you talk about the broad stuff, everybody can say, oh yeah, I know there's a pipe coming, and, you know, this and that. But when it gets down to, okay, I got a tree here and a driveway there, and they want to know. And maybe at some point, maybe not for this town meeting, but maybe we end up, working with the engineers and actually make a video or something that marches around somebody's, or a couple properties and say, okay, here's a piece of pipe, and,
I agree.
here's one of these grinder pumps, that kind of stuff, so.
That's a good idea.
On Peter's note, I had talked at last meeting, whether we go in that direction or not, about, almost becoming more expert in certain parts of what I'll call the target area. Whether we break up and do that, it's just an idea for discussion, but, whether Chris Harlow was the expert in, these 25 streets and somebody else was, so that you knew, was that an area where the elevation was a problem? Was that an area where the landscaping was a problem? In your area, there might be 80% of the homes might be kind of boilerplate and not have a real issue, but there might be 20 homes that have some serious issues. So it's just an idea to talk about it a further time, about how we as a committee could get more up and personal with these however many streets that I don't know the number of yet.
I think it's our job to get ourselves educated, number one, because I don't think anybody here has held or seen a grinder pump. I don't know. I mean, I haven't, I'm looking forward to it. I want to hug one and see what it's about, but we should never get ourselves, in my opinion, in a position where we're going around our consulting engineers or design engineers. They are the experts. They're the ones that, go out with the transit and shoot the elevations and whatnot. We don't want to get ourselves in a position where we tell a homeowner, okay, this is exactly what you have to do. You have to go down 6.2 feet. Because then if they have to go down 8 feet, they're going to come back to us. They're going to come back to the town and say, wait a minute, what's going on? So I think our job is to be the conduit or facilitator that allows that to happen, whether that's workshops, whether it's, setting ourselves up, I'll just be facetious and say a clubhouse on the first floor of Albert House, where we set up samples of what these pipes and pumps and everything look like and put the cartoons up and have the database on the survey and whatnot, where we could have regular hours and people could come in and say, okay, can you tell me about my property? And then we pick up the phone, whatever, and say, hey, Dave Young, you need to meet with Fred on Tuesday at 9 o'clock, or whatever it is, because they need to do that.
Right. And I absolutely agree. I didn't mean to insinuate ourselves in the middle between the public and the engineers by any means. I just meant to develop an affinity and a familiarity with those areas so that we have some knowledge of the.
Yeah, and I think that goes to us as a committee having credibility.
Yeah.
And so the more we get educated about what this whole thing is about in East Harwich and the details of it, the more people are going to look at us and say, can you help me? I mean, that's the whole idea. And we're going to say, yes, we can, hopefully, or we can point you in the right direction, or here are the resources, we have to try and assist what you're doing. So we should be that conduit and that contact point, if you will.
Larry?
One of the questions I had, is anybody on this committee going to be sewered? Okay,
Not first round, second.
okay.
How about the Board of Selectmen?
Well, I am. I'm in the first round because I'm right there in the Northeast Drive, so I'm right in the middle of the.
How about Julie? Is she out there?
And you're in a grinder
Is Julie
area,
out there?
right?
Pardon?
Is Julie out there?
Doesn't know it.
Julie's going to be sewered, but I don't exactly know her address. She's in that area. There'll be two of us that are going to be sewered the first round.
And when we were talking about communications, one of the fascinating things I'm interested in is what is going to be our best and maybe worst avenues of communication. On one of the slides last night, the speaker talked about Chris Clark as a communicator, the engineer, our website, public meetings and newspapers. That's a pretty broad spectrum. I'd like to find out if is one more effective than the other. For example, is community public television, is that better than the newspaper in terms of getting our information out? And one of the ways I think we could test this, just at an elementary level, is to find out how many people in the next week are going to watch last night's show. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that 10 people watch the show between now and next Tuesday, our next meeting. That tells me that we better not spend a whole lot of time using cable television Because 10 people is not a very effective way to reach 600 people or 6,000 people. So I'd hope we could keep that in mind, to really target our audience as well as our message. But some vehicles are not strong. Other vehicles may be very, very strong.
And just a quick comment. Is this being taped? Heinz Prof, Natural Resources Director, previous member of the Wastewater Implementation Committee. Kind of going on lines, Chris, and also as you go forward with, we used to have these display easels in Chamber of Commerce, Community Center, Library, Town Hall. And I often was the one that was refilling those pamphlets. Most recently was the town meeting. The one that required the most refilling was the Community Center.
That would make sense.
Town Hall and Library, I would call a tie, and then the Chamber of Commerce was the one that there wasn't really much pickup of that information at that point. So as you plan going forward or reach out, or if we want to take down those, or if return them back to you and you want to fill them with frequently asked questions or something, that isn't ever, that does work, but to the scope, it's the community center that seemed to have the most traffic and the most people taking information from those billboards. They're still there, but it says empty, and it says if this is empty, call my number. But I don't have anything to fill it with, or how we want to, but incorporate maybe that into your outreach as well.
Go ahead.
I think there's two target markets. One's the town in general, town-wide, that cares about, the overall plan and how it's gonna go forward and how it's gonna get funded. And very specifically, those folks that are involved this phase 2, they're gonna have the pipe at their house, and they're gonna have to pay and be affected by it. Those, I think you might communicate with differently. And I think however many houses there end up being in phase 2, I don't know how many there are, Larry?
600.
How many?
600.
600. I think those we have to go after individually, if you will, and make sure that we don't just take it for granted. They see something on TV, I think there's gotta be target marketing at those 600, if you will, at some point.
Along those lines, real quick, and you might be able to answer this. We talked about having neighborhood liaisons.
Right.
This is going to, directly to what you're saying is, how are we going to go about getting those? Now, I know you have Judith Underwood in mind for at least one of those. And I don't know what area she comes from, so I don't know. But how are we thinking of?
Well, I think first, if I could, we have to look at the map and kind of identify the, 5 neighborhoods or whatever, however many, 4, 6. I certainly think Barbara Haderman, is that the correct
Hagerman,
pronunciation?
yeah.
She certainly would be one. Larry's a possibility unless he's in the same neighborhood. I think he is.
Same neighborhood.
So we'll keep him separate. Julie Kavanaugh is a possibility. Or maybe we want to keep her separate. But let's look at a map and then figure out.
All right, and can we, just one thing, can we get a map, a current map from, I guess Chris Clark has it. This came up before. Can we get not one of these little ones that you have to use a magnifying glass to look at, but a bigger one that we can put on an easel and look at to familiarize?
He said we'd have him by the end of the month.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Excuse me, I think along those lines, that either at our next meeting or the one after that, Chris, David Young, I forget the gentleman's name who seemed to be doing most of the engineering work. Michael.
Michael, yeah.
Some combination of them need to come here and give us a data dump and tell us what is available information. And we can say, yes, we'd like that, no, we'd like that, okay, we'd take 3 of those, that kind of thing, because they're the repository at the moment, and a lot of it's not available to the public just because it isn't. And so our job is to collect that information and figure out how to disseminate it, quite frankly.
Could I also add to that, we might want to, when they are here, make further suggestions about what they can add to their presentations, because they need a critique from the ground, if you will. And that will answer an additional layer of questions. Also, on the opinion leaders for neighborhoods, I'm not sure this can be done, but at one level, I was thinking having actual neighborhood meetings, where you send out a postcard to a neighborhood and say, we're discussing your issues. We will have a meeting with you and those interested, because we know they will disseminate it to their neighbors. And there may be some neighborhoods that are very comparable. So is there a phase 2 neighborhood that's going to face very similar issues? You know, if your neighborhood is hilly, are you going to need the grinders? If your neighborhood is very wet, are you going to need if you're next to a pond, are you going, you know, there's a whole set of neighborhood characteristics. Do you have a lot of dead-end streets in your neighborhood actually impacts, I know that was a big issue in Chatham, in the piping. Are corner lots different? I mean, there's a whole list of things that many of the neighborhoods either do or do not have in common. The newer neighborhoods have very different pipe sizes than the old neighborhoods. You know, there's all sorts of issues that have a tangible impact that could be quickly answered. And that's in that group 2 that you've defined of people who are facing having to figure out how to connect.
All right, Larry, you've been waiting.
Well, because I'm not part of the committee, so don't want to speak out of turn. Larry Valentine, Board of Selectmen liaison to this committee. I wanted to kind of start at the beginning of just the sense of the committee moving forward. And broadly speaking, I think there are two items that I think you should pay attention to. One I'll call more engineering, finance detail oriented, and the other one I'll call soft targets. The first one I think it'd be appropriate for the committee to track the progress of the construction phase in East Harwich watershed. In other words, phase 2. I mean, you're not going to do this work, but for me personally, I think for us all, we want to be sure we go to town meeting with all the facts tied down. If we don't have some of these questions answered from last night and what we all have about what they cost, you know, we all are a little nervous about the $22 million because it's years old. We're supposed to be re-looking at that. We need to have that tied down for town meeting. We need the cost of the connections, the stuff we're gathering. You don't do it, but I think it'd be worth this committee to track that in preparation for town meeting, that we're comfortable going in and telling people what's happening. And, you know, down to the, because I think we all know that based on past experience, estimate with a trust me is not going to fly very much with this meeting, and that's tracking. And now I'll go to my second. Peter, you wanted to comment on that?
Can I just ask a question there, Larry? My understanding is when we voted the 12 million or whatever last year, obviously I covered the money for Chatham.
Right.
It was like $7 million. And then it was about $2 million or so for the engineering work associated with phase 2, is that right?
Yep.
So in my mind, in my memory, C.W. Smith has enough money now, it's authorized by the town, to finish the design work, right?
Exactly. And that's,
So my question becomes, I didn't raise it last night, but I will tonight. Why is it essential to put out and vote on the $22 million at this town meeting, as opposed to waiting until the design work is done and go out to bid and come back with bid prices? I know it will delay one construction season,
right.
but is that worth it?
You're getting to my bottom line, and my bottom line is, if we don't have the facts tied down before this town meeting, we should delay it.
See, my personal opinion is,
But I'm not, no one wants to give up on that yet, because, you know, we have the contract signed, they're supposed to get this done. But I don't want any unanswered questions going into town meeting for this.
I just want to add one thing. When you brought up about tracking this information, all right, on the construction, that's going to require both Chris Clark, David Young, maybe through Chris Clark, to provide us with this information.
Right.
We, as a committee, don't have any way of going out there and getting it. So this was one of my main questions when this committee was put together, is how are we getting this information?
Well, but you can request that through Chris Clark to CDM Smith.
I think that,
I guess my feeling is, I think we need something a little more concrete than just asking. This has to be an ongoing issue, where they're giving us the information, not where, because sometimes we're not gonna know to ask for it.
well, I
But we
think,
don't know what they're doing.
I think Peter's suggestion of asking them for a data dump first to find out
To
exactly
start
where
out
they
with.
are.
Yes,
And then at that point, you'll know which ones they're not complete yet, you know? Because obviously they haven't got all the answers yet, and that's fine, but we'll need to get those before we get to town meetings, but
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. And if we don't get those before town meeting, then we need to rethink of, is it worth taking the risk of getting defeated because there's too many unanswered questions?
Well,
That's
Noreen remembers the
expectation we
days
have.
on the finance committee, you do, Larry, as well, where we would never take anything in town meeting unless we had a construction project, unless we had bids. And 3
Right.
bids, and then we took the low bidder, and we went to town meeting and said, this is the number, as
Yeah.
opposed to, this is what the engineers think it will be. And then we find out we're short by, pick a number,
Yeah.
$500,000,
And-
then what do you do?
And we want to get real close to that step. We want to know as close as we can where
I'm
we're
not sure
going.
based on what I heard last night, until they give us the data dump, that they're gonna be that far along, I just don't know.
I don't either, but my point is, I mean, that, to me, that's the bottom line, though. We either we need to be comfortable with our data going to town meeting, or I don't think any of us want to stand up there and take a wild guess, or even an educated guess at this point, because we've seen where that leads us in the past.
So maybe the point here is that we get the information from the designers, the engineers, and as the selectmen's representatives, if you will, on this topic, we either at some point say, hey, we don't think we're ready, or we are ready.
Exactly.
I mean, that's maybe our role.
Exactly.
We
And
say we're not comfortable with it, then, we're not comfortable with it.
Yeah, perfect. And I think if you do the data dump, you can identify the gaps that we need to get answered, and
And so
go
when they
after
come and
that.
give us a data dump, then I think it's our responsibility to say, all right, Dave Young, every third meeting or something, we expect you to be here first on the agenda if you want, whatever, but we
Right.
want to know what else you got done,
And-
or something.
along those lines, with you being our liaison,
Yeah.
can you go back to, I don't know if it's the board, because I know he's a consultant, and I know he gets paid by the hour, so it is our job to ask whether he can come to these things, but can you check on whether we can get this data dump? Can we get Chris Clark and
I'll
David
follow
Young?
up, I'll take the action and follow up on that.
All right, all
Yeah,
right,
certainly will. Put that in the minutes, and
all right.
I'll take the action and follow up.
I don't want to interrupt Larry's 2 points, but,
No, because I only got one.
Oh.
No, I got a second one coming.
yeah, all right. But on the one that you just listed, to be a little more specific, I heard last night that the results from the survey were available, the survey that went
Right.
out to the target area. We would love to get our hands on that. I wasn't gonna, last night, ask for copies right then, but if you could get us
Okay.
that would be good. And the other thing I was thinking about is the presenter, Michael Guidici, I probably mispronounced that, but he talked about a questionnaire going out to, I think he called it ISOs, individual service, I don't know, locations of some sort. And the questionnaire would have been like, where is your septic, which side of the house you want it on, and questions about grinder pumps. I got the impression he was talking about that survey going out, I guess now, or was it right before construction?
No, I think my understanding, and that was a little confusing, but
It was.
my understanding was that when they're putting the pipes in the ground, they were going to survey personally, talk to each one and say, where do you want to connect to the pipe? Are you going to go, the diagrams he's shown?
Yeah, because my point,
Go ahead, well, just finish that.
Yeah.
The part that left me a little confused, quite frankly, was the sequence of doing that to the request or the requirement that you have an engineered design of how you're going to connect.
exactly.
And I assume sequentially, they would do the survey first. They'd ask you, they'd come to my house and say, well, where are you going to come out? And then I have to hire someone to do the engineering part of it, but.
But on that point, something to consider, as I say, I'm not sure when this lands, and it's obviously information like, if we don't know the number of finished basements, I mean, that's a huge question. And I don't know if we can get that information from the building department, the assessors department, the health department, but, I mean, since so many of the homes have the septic going out the back, And we'll have to make the decision about whether to do the long pipe. I mean, that's a huge percentage of homes
Yes.
are gonna be affected by that question, or whether to put the pipe through their cellar if they have an unfinished basement. But, I mean, I certainly hope we can get information like that, not 2 years from now, but now, because, you know, how can we deal with the neighborhood when that's such a basic?
Yeah, that, and, go ahead, Peter.
You know, as a follow-on to that, I think it's important at some point, we bring in the health director at one of our meetings with the specific purpose. Last night, I heard a number of times, oh, you can go to the health department and find out where your septic is and, you know, what information is available on your septic. Well, maybe she should come in and explain to us and to the folks at home, what is that information? And by the way, how does someone access it if they're really interested in knowing? So in other words, if someone goes to the window and asks, here's my property, are they gonna pull out a folder and say, well, okay, your system, you know, was installed on this date, it consists of this, here's a little plan, you know, that kind of stuff, so people will know what they can expect from the health department as far as records go.
Yeah, that's a good point, just to follow, and then I'll turn it over to you, just, yeah, I hire someone to pump my septic tank, and so they have that map, I don't have access, and so, you know, I've never tried to get it, because you call someone up and they, you know.
But you could get it if you
You
want.
could get it, I mean, I assume that if, in my case, Robert Auer can get it, then I should be able to have it, but I haven't done that.
Adding to your confusion is, when they were speaking, the timeline date-wise was also a little unclear. They were giving dates, but they weren't being specific about whether it was the first group or the second. And it would be really useful to have a provisional timeline.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah.
It was blurred in terms of the sentences, just didn't have a reference
I think
sometimes.
as you go further, we take that, whatever it was, pink-colored section of the chart, and I think that gets color-coded further to say, okay, these are the 6 streets we expect to do the first construction season, these are the 14 we expect, you know, that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly.
And that leads me into my second point, actually, is what I'm calling the soft communication part, which is making people feel comfortable with where we're going and the communication works. You know, to the part of the discussion that you've raised and others have raised on these detailed questions, I think what they're saying last night is, you know, slow down. We're a couple years away from making those. But I know in my neighborhood, we have a very active group, as you heard last night, and you know, they're ready to march forward, but they want to have some structure behind it because they're worried about, you know, one fellow wants to put a patio on. Does that, you know, so they want to at least have a generic sense of what's going. So my second, I think, and you have some time to do that. We can answer the framework, but I think if you guys, before anything else, you've already had some discussion on it, is decide what your structure is going to be to get the communication out, and let people know what that is. Whether it's, and I actually have a very positive example in my neighborhood, because I do have Barbara Hagelman, who's taken the role of being the neighborhood, and we have a neighborhood association, and she's taken the lead of getting people together, holding meetings. I'll meet with her, met with her 2 days ago, I'll meet with her again today, and talk about things going forward. And she gets input from all the neighbors. If we can, and you help me out on advertise, what do you call this, is if you're
Opinion leaders.
opinion leaders.
Either that or neighborhood liaisons, I think
That's
sounds,
probably a better term than opinion,
Yeah.
but the same thing. You want a champion that can get to the neighbor and answer some of these questions. But the framework, and I think, Chris, in the neighborhood aspect, that's much more vital than, you're really talking two things. One is what we're doing in phase 2, where we identify the homes, versus what Peter brought up is, at the same time, we need to carry everyone out, we need to carry along everyone in Harwich, even though they're not being. And so it's really two different campaigns. But if you guys can, you know, get the structure of how you're going to put this together and communicate that, so people know that we're worried about getting communication, even before you get into the details, what you're going to communicate.
Maybe we ask Barbara, how would you like us to communicate with you best? You know, what does she think?
Yeah.
Maybe there are some other folks out there
Yeah.
too, but.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
along those lines, one, we need to identify the people, and I think that sounds like that can be done relatively easy if they're willing to do it. that what we're going to call the neighbor liaisons. The other question that I have is, how soon can we get this data dumped? Because at this point, at least I don't, have any more information than I had when the last committee was resolved. I
Well,
don't have any
Let
new
me,
information.
let me know what your next schedule, and let me see if let me get back to you, see what we can work out, and I'll talk.
Larry, are there any other neighborhood associations within Phase 2? that
Well,
you
my
know of?
particular neighborhood, and they kind of overlap, I'm a northeast, as probably everyone knows, and we have that neighborhood that, follows that circle there. There's also Pleasant Bay Neighborhood Association that somewhat overlaps. They were involved, and they'd be a good one to get.
At some point, it'd be great to get a list of the membership with the
I
addresses of those
I can get you
two.
those two. Now,
That'd be great.
we talked about Continental. I'm not sure how they're organized, but there are a lot of these neighborhoods. I'm sure we're not unique. It'll take some more work that we'll all have to look at.
Yep.
I'll try to look around as well. I think someone argued that we do need a detailed map that identifies the neighborhoods, because that I don't know. And I know Julie says she's going to be sewered, but I haven't cornered her yet. I'm going to see if we can get someone from her neighborhood involved, because we've had a broad discussion. It's going to take a little legwork. It's doable, but we're going to all have to. Ann, I think you're in the general area there, so.
I'm in the second group to go forward. I think it's imperative we get all the first group.
So
First
when
group first.
You say the
Something
second
like
group, but you mean Phase 2?
Phase 2.
Okay.
But the
Gotcha.
second, because they're talking about not doing all 600 at one time, so. But, anyway, those are my points of structure. So, one final comment, I think Barbara made a point last night that Falmouth had done a very good job of listing the details. She actually emailed that to me right after the meeting, so I'll email it to you, Sharon, and you can distribute it to her.
All right, I will.
I haven't looked at it, but she's pretty good, so it's been.
On that note, I brought this in for Ann to show her, but this is just an example of the approved installers in Eastham. And last night, I thought I heard them talk about 5, 6, or 7. Eastham had classes, it's a small town, and there's about 60 for them to pick from. So just an idea of that we need to beef up. But that's right on their website, right on their municipal water website.
That was one of the things that we brought up before, that based on what came back from the certificate, is the town should have a list of qualified engineers that can do the installation that people can choose from. Do you know where that stands? Who's looking into this? Is it going to be CDM Smith? Is it going to be Caffarelli? Like who's doing this?
I don't have the answer for that.
Okay.
I think from last night's meeting, I can give you part of the answer. That would happen later on, and they would also go through people that would apply and approve, and they would be a combination of town personnel along with CDM Smith, and then they would also produce a list. The only thing that caught my ear was I heard them talk about 5, 6, or 7 as opposed to.
I guess my question is when? All right, are we, they say, all right, we're not going to be doing this for like 2 or 3 years till water starts flowing. People aren't going to want to wait for 2 or 3 years to get this information and start talking to people. They can't all do it within the 1 year once we get everything, that the pipes are in the ground, and now all of a sudden you've got a year to do this.
Well,
They wouldn't be training people before they get further in the design. Our representatives, whether they're the town or CDM Smith, has to have training sessions and screening sessions for these people. That wouldn't be their focus right now while they're in the beginning of the design stage. It just wouldn't.
No, yeah. I think the town would take the ultimate responsibility for making that list up. They get input from CDM Smith, but certainly it'd be Chris and, the health department would be, because they're doing the septic, so those would be the two I would imagine that would.
Yeah, sure.
And I know my particular case, and I've already tried to arrange started discussions on arranging a meeting between one of our local contractors in our neighborhood to talk through some of the mechanics of how they would do the work, because they've come to me and they've had discussions that we tend to take for granted, but if I'm homeowner X, do I have to hire a plumber, an electrician, a digger? separately, could, you know, we know that's not true, you hire, but they have some just,
Yep.
it's all new to them. And so I've invited, and we're in the near future, we'll probably have a neighborhood meeting just to go through from one of our local contractors of, you know, if you call up, you know, what does happen? Put this forward, because that would ease their mind that they're not going to be out there. You know, some of this is raising the level of comfort, because if you're going into a new area and you're thinking, well, geez, I'm going to have to call 5 different people to get this organized. You know, design engineer, a plumber, electrician is
There needs to be one-stop shopping for the homeowner, quite
you
frankly.
need to be that. And the town needs to take a role of being sure it's scheduled sequentially so it works as well. And that's, I think, our role and your role, that we have a comfort that there's a structure behind this that's going to make it as less stressful as possible.
Madam Chair, I have to run,
Yes.
unfortunately. Could we just decide, are we meeting next Tuesday at 8:30?
At 8:30 until we, you know, change.
I'll probably
Okay.
All right.
talk to Nell Fan, but
And we're gonna try and get Chris Clark and David Young here, whomever.
Will you see if they
Chris
can?
Clark mentioned that he would not make, he could make the Tuesday meetings other than that one, because it's the 4th. It's a monthly thing he
Let's
has.
get David Young here, or
Yeah.
somebody.
but we can get Dave, you know, that would, we can feed that back. We can get
All right.
Dave.
Okay,
and,
sorry, I gotta run,
That's,
but
all right,
thank you very much.
Pete,
All
good
right.
to see you, Pete.
Um,
Take care of yourself.
I also think it's important to remind CDM Smith and everyone that, you know, there are a fair number of people who are out of town for 6 months and a day. And so all of those year windows are actually, for some people, 6-month windows.
Yeah.
So 2 years becomes, in real time, becomes one 12-month period scattered over 2 years, because that's going to be a challenge.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say before Peter left, Sharon is going to try to get the letters, the appointment letters to you 2 gentlemen expedited. So if you can possibly turn them around by next Tuesday, then you'll be voting
Yep.
members.
I did
Then we
say,
could vote for Sharon for chairman.
You can vote for whoever you want.
all right, all right, she didn't get back to me, because I did email her, and I thought
Okay.
maybe that letter would have been downstairs with her.
I'll check today on
Yeah.
my way out.
We get any time, just, you let us know.
All right, if I can get your letter, I'll pick it up and drop it off to you.
Just email, you know, it's not a problem. Or just
All
let
right.
me know it's there and
All
I'll,
right.
you know.
All right, will do.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Thanks.
See you, Peter.
Okay.
all right. So I'm assuming that that covered the town meeting issues and the East Harwich project.
And the opinion leaders.
Opinion leaders. We had talked before, and the outreach. The only thing we didn't talk about any further is the wastewater charge. I think we pretty well have covered that, as well as to what we're working on, mostly the outreach, all right? Going
Well,
down,
I think it's evolving is part of the charge, too,
Yeah.
is that we may need to amend that rather than leave it as something that's carved in stone.
that, I guess, has to go through the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you can't ask them.
Okay, all right, all right.
Do we feel that, based on the charge, and there are roughly 10 items, there's enough emphasis on kind of the financial oversight?
Well,
You could sit up here, Larry, if you wanted.
no, I don't.
No, you can't.
I don't know the answer to that. When I wrote the charge, quite frankly, I tried to make it as broad and I guess somewhat vague, so that you guys could work within the framework and do what you want to get done. And so I'm hoping I didn't tie the hands because I didn't specifically say something that would prevent you from doing what you feel is right. I intentionally didn't try to tie it specific, I wanted generally to give you freedom to do what needs to be done.
So one of the
So
questions...
I don't think it'll stop you. I think there's nothing there to do all the financial stuff you want to do.
In several questions last night, the question came up, I don't know if I can afford this. This came from the public. I mean, is that something we should be concerned with?
Well, I think it is. You can argue that people can afford to put something else down. I've debated this internally being with Chris and John Giorgio, and or at least through what our options are. And as I said last night, our options seem to be somewhat limited, but I don't want to give up on that. You know, if you look at normal life in Harwich, we offer abatements, for instance, if we, you know, maybe there's something we can do for those that really do need it. You know, are there some options? I know some other towns have done some interesting things with bonding to offer, you know, people to borrow money at lower rates of interest. I'm told that may or may not be completely workable. I would only say we need to explore, and I'm realistic about it. It appears what people tell me that there may be minimal opportunity to do something, but I don't want to give up on that, nor do I think you guys should.
Okay. So, from the questions last night, I think that's hugely important. And I really think we should have a meeting in advance when we come prepared to talk about different options. We certainly don't set policy, but there's nothing wrong with us making various recommendations to the Board of Selectmen for their consideration. They can develop their own recommendations as well. But, I mean, that to me was 60% of the question last night.
Yes.
And, you know, I think Peter's wonderful to think about things like showing people grinder pumps and stuff like that, but quite honestly, unless it had a price tag on it, you know, I wouldn't be interested in it. You know what I mean? There's a large group of people that just want to keep their property looking nice, not have too much hassle, and find out how much it's going to cost. You know, they don't want all the nuts and bolts, you know, beyond that.
Yeah.
So I would really want to explore our feelings, because otherwise, when the public, if we're the liaison to the public and the public asks us, what are we going to do? You know, what are we going to say? You know, we don't
It's
know.
too serious a point to blow it off. I'm reaching out to Orlean Selectman, who's done a fair amount of work in this area as well, to see what they can do.
But
I
the
mean, get
piece-
some more information. But
The piece that didn't come out last night, and I was very surprised, and I think the message has to be made much stronger over the next few months, is the piece about the operations and maintenance. On their chart, they had the figure of 500, and I didn't look up my water bill last night, I forgot to, but they had the figure of $500 a year per household to contribute to the operations and maintenance. Now, we kind of know that that probably won't kick in for at least 10 years, maybe longer, because there are too few homes to charge them that. On the other hand, I did hear Chris Clark say it could go out as much as 30 years. Personally, I don't agree with that, because I look at East Harwich as being kind of a self-contained town. You know, we're using the capacity of the Chatham facility just enough for that community. So once those 1,000 homes are completed, that area should be able to be the O&M, not before that. But we shouldn't have to wait for the whole town to be sewered for that area to be the portion of the Chatham facility.
I would agree with that, but I think he was probably speaking of that area versus the whole town.
I'm
Yeah, we
talking about
had
those
that.
1,000 homes, yes.
Right.
Yeah, the 600,
But there's chances, if you look at when this is done, 40 years from now, that'll still take some time afterwards before
Right.
it could be,
Well-
before those people, because they only have sewer in half the town. It could take some time before they're all, you know, self-sustaining,
the
basically.
1,000 homes.
Right.
Well, I mean, by the plan, it's like 10 or 12 years, we'll see, maybe
Right.
it's 15 or 20, whatever. But at some point, I think we do have to start getting the message out to people that, don't worry about that now, but it is their bill. All we have to change is the way we're gonna operate, you know what I mean? Because there it was, $500 sitting on that chart, and I was very surprised that there wasn't a single question about it. And I don't know why nobody did ask a question, but I mean, that's a huge amount every year, $500. So, but I think we have to define, it will start coming up as a question, and we kind of have to decide
Well,
when
we-
that will kick in. Is it 15 years, is it 20 years?
Right. We have to understand where that number comes from,
Right.
which I don't know exactly.
Right,
I was asked a couple weeks ago by Jack Brown about what I thought Finance Committee could help out on this issue. And I said, this particular issue, looking forward to maintenance and stuff, operational expenses, maybe they can look at it as well as you guys do.
All right, I'm just saying that I'd rather not forget that because it's looming out there.
Yeah.
It also is an issue that, since it's in the public domain, I mean, if somebody's selling a house, it may have an impact on that
Yeah.
as well, which is a blurry area, to say the least.
I agree.
Did we ever finish the charter changes to ensure that private roads have to hook up? Did they involve charter changes? We talked about it so many times, but I don't.
I don't recall. That'd be something I can't
Right.
answer.
That's going to be important all of a sudden at some point.
Yeah. You raise questions that we need, I know Julie, because of her experience in real estate in Chatham, is very much concerned that we know as quickly as possible what easements are going to be needed.
Right.
And that's part of the data dump that we'll need to get from CDM Smith, because, that sometimes can be a time-consuming process.
All right.
So there are questions we raised, but I think where you're going, you're getting structurally things where you want to go is what we need now.
So maybe at some point we'll have an agenda item that's specific to discussing the financial issues involved with hookups. And keep it just to that and be prepared to talk about it.
I think that's going to be in the future after we get this data done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not too far in the future.
Yeah. All right, new business. We pretty well covered the community meeting last evening. The spreadsheet, we had talked about maybe having to go through how I arrived at that spreadsheet, and we can put that off to another meeting. And the sewer regulations, I don't have yet, so I'm waiting to get a copy of those. All right. Right.
I'm going to be disappointed if I'm wrong,
I thought too that had to be agreed upon before the IMA was signed. That was my understanding, and I could be wrong on that. But I think Chris did say they are finalized. I just
Yeah, the
can't
vote
find
is.
them. So, all right. The next meeting is going to be next.
Okay, so I have correspondence.
Correspondence. Is there any?
Yes.
Oh,
Well, it's not really correspondence, but this is where I'm going to put it in.
okay.
The Department of Revenue has bulletins that they send out all the time, and it's a great website. And I only was able to print one of these, but this is a grant through their sewer relief fund, which actually the application expires next week. And I only had a chance to just read through, just skim this. And I don't believe we're eligible, but I'm certainly not any expert. The reason I don't believe we're eligible is I believe it only gives relief for debt that is already bonded on a long-term basis, not on a short-term basis. And I really wouldn't know specifically, but I don't think that they've bonded any long-term debt. Maybe they have. I mean, I don't really know. But either way, I thought, I hope there's some way we can start some kind of a tickler file for grant information, because some grants that come by are unique and one of, as I hate that new phrase, but others are cyclical, and they come up every year, with certain dates. And if we're probably not eligible for this year through the state, we certainly might be in a position, by next year, and it's $1 million of actual relief, not a loan. So I didn't know if we could, at some point, think about a person to designate as kind of their bailiwick would be grants, or some kind of a tickler file for the cyclical grants that we start, because this was just published through the DLS a week ago. Well, who has time in 2 weeks? Even the regular workers, they have jobs to do. They don't have time to be, looking at these every second. But if we had some way of knowing these were coming up 2 months in advance, you know, so just something I wanted to, if somebody would like to look at this, who's better able to figure out if we're eligible, you're,
Is that something that,
Could I suggest that you, today, you give a copy, give that to Carol downstairs, and just, she can answer the questions about long-term debt.
okay.
You know, and it won't take her just a minute, I think, to give a quick scan to see if we're eligible or not. That won't help, if we are eligible, then we have another, we have to figure out what we
Right.
can apply for.
I'll stop in there
It'd be good to have-
and leave her a
if you
note.
answer that question.
Right. And the other thing I'll say on that, there's a website, which is the DLS, which is the Division of Local Services, which is a part of the Department of Revenue. And if the committee likes, I'll send you the link to those, because it comes out, I forget, every few weeks. I know Larry and I look at it. It's a wealth of information. It's an absolute wealth of information. And when you get it, you just kind of look at it and see if it's topics you're interested in or not. But if you like, I will send that link to all of you for you to have. And then you sign up for it, and you just get it in your own email every month, so. But I'll drop this off with Carol, and, but maybe we can, you know, think about a tickler file at some point for grant information.
Larry,
Because that's clearly part of our role.
is that something that Chris Clark is also doing? Looking for grants?
I don't think he is. And that's the discussion we've had, I think, at a lot of meetings and board of selectmen, is that we don't have, you know, each department, you know, Heinz goes after, John does, everyone does,
Yeah.
goes after their own
Sometimes we
grant.
compete against each other.
We don't have a centralized function of doing that. We're
In-
trying to
in-
figure out how we can put that in place, but, you know, everyone's busy. It doesn't-
Exactly. I would say as a former municipal worker, you know, it's great that I find these things now that I'm retired. When I was working, I didn't have time to look at these things. You know, you'd see it and you'd say, that sounds good, but by the time you got back to it and actually looked at it, they really, it's not built into their jobs to be able to research all these things, so.
It's remarkable, and that a department has as many grants as they do and everything else.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we keep talking about finding, I know I keep suggesting that maybe we can get together with one of our neighboring towns, because it's not a full-time activity to do it. And we haven't, and I'll bring it up again, because it's just something that keeps slipping through the cracks. No excuses. Could I add a little bit to that?
Sure.
That's state-based. I'm interested also in the role that the Cape Cod Commission has in grant disbursement. And are we capable of monitoring what they are doing in terms of the grants they get that are in turn supposed to be spread around the various communities on the Cape?
I need to follow up on that on a formal process. I know that when I get, the Cape Cod Commission right now is working on a grant to help the water monitoring program. And we had a meeting last week, and I haven't gotten it yet, but I asked and they promised to send me the information on that grant. When I get those, I'll circulate to you guys right away. And that's this Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative. I get some of that information, but to your point, we need to follow up and see if there's more of a process that they can help us learn about federal grants. And I'll do that. I'll put that as an agenda item on our next meeting
Thank
to
you.
see if we could do it.
Do we have anybody in the town that, and I don't know that they have this, as a liaison to the Cape Cod Commission? I mean,
Oh, we do, yes. Now I forget her name. Heinz, can you help me out?
Yeah, there's.
We have because we have a appointed member of the Cape Cod Commission. And unfortunately, it's escaping right now. You can look at the website, it's listed.
what website, I'm kind of at a loss.
You can look at the county website, it'll be listed. I think it'll be listed on our town website as well, if you look at departments and communities. But go to the Cape Cod Commission, it lists all the members of the Cape Cod Commission. But, and that'd be another avenue.
Yeah.
This works for me because it's water protection, so they're supposed to be giving us that information through the Water Protection collaborative as well.
That would, maybe we could ask that, our representative to come
Yes,
to one of our
yeah,
meetings.
That's where I was going
Be
with
good,
this.
it'd be a good idea, absolutely.
And when you mention federal ones, this might be out of left field, but it might not. You know, it seems as though the federal government is possibly going to pass some kind of a bill on infrastructure this year. And who could be, you know, if we can position ourselves to be shovel-ready, or whatever the requirement is with this one, for this job, that would just be unbelievable, you know? So I think to stay in touch with that's going on, and to have access to a grant writer or something like that were to happen, we would have to hire a true grant writer immediately. Well, I mean, we wouldn't have to, but that's one of the things we could do, to be prepared to get our share of that money that comes and goes so quickly.
And it gives us incentive actually to move ahead this spring if we
That's
possibly
right.
can.
Yeah.
Because right now, we're ahead of most, a lot of our community, you know,
Yeah.
neighboring.
I mean, I don't know if we're in that popular estate for getting these funds, you know, but we certainly would have to throw our hat in the ring.
Well, they said last night we were #1, right, on the SRF.
I meant in the country, will we be the #1 state? I don't know about that.
All right, does anyone have anything else?
Could we just review the highlights of next week's agenda?
Yes.
And who's going to be responsible for each of those parts?
All right, well, the first one, let's back up a second. We are going to confirm that we're going to be meeting, because it wasn't in any of our minutes, that we're going to go do the first and third Tuesdays. All right, and then we had talked about this, what was it, the second Wednesday, just to have an evening meeting for the town people. I don't know that we're ready to do one of those Wednesday meetings in the evening yet.
Well, in February, I would think.
Yes, February, yes.
But what do you mean by confirm? I mean,
In other words, we didn't have him in the minutes, but because they, well, Peter wasn't here, that we did say we were going to meet the first and third Tuesdays at
Right.
8:30. We might change it to 8 o'clock if we can do that.
right. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's not something we have to vote on. It's really just a consensus.
Well, what I was considering
your
is if
pleasure?
we had agreed to do that,
Yeah.
to have that actually under wastewater committee, just like they do with the Board of Selectmen, list, this is when our meetings are going to be, if we know that we're going to do that, at least through May. So now, we are throwing in an extra one next Tuesday,
Right.
all right? You were going to see, Larry was going to see if we can get David Young for a data dump. So that would be on the agenda.
Okay. Are we really ready for David Young? I mean, don't we need the data first and then review it and then have David Young? I'm not,
Let me talk to him and see what the sequence, how much they can.
right. I don't want to have David, you know, too much. At times, we don't need him. You know, we need the data first. You know, Dave's sitting here and we get 30 reports.
All right, so when you're asking for data without David Young actually being here, what are we looking for? That would be my, well, and this is my.
The survey results
The
is
survey results.
my first thing.
The reason to have David here for a short meeting is to ask questions. Because we don't know what we don't know, maybe not what we need.
One of my things is, what has been done since May of last year up till now, as far as moving ahead with the construction, with the design? And I know they listed the topographical stuff, but I think, is that all that was done? You know, where are we with this whole phase two?
That's the reason that you need to take the phase.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
think it's this.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you're saying we ought to get the information before we have David here. My question is, what information are we looking for? What are we going to ask him for? I don't know what he's going to provide us without actually being here, is I guess my,
That's fine. I want the survey results. That's
well,
really what I want to see.
that's good to have, but I don't think that's the only thing we need.
You know, I think it'd be worthwhile, understanding more, better than we do now,
Yes.
of what they have, what what do they say they have to do next?
Or what do we have now, and then where do we have to go?
What's the timeframe for getting that information? Because, you know, they've talked about, they've done the survey, they've done the initial survey. There's some follow-up questions on front versus back, on, you know, outlying areas.
That's true, yeah.
Things that were brought up, but I don't know if I know enough right now to ask the right questions to get what we want.
That would be a very good point, because I don't know that we do, I don't even know what I'm getting at is I don't know what to ask for.
I would like to see a detailed map of the Seward area for Phase 2. I would like to see in the design, what part of the design is a pressure system and what is gravity?
So that would be something that if you go back and ask whether we can have David Young here, and you speak to him, these would be the type of things that we can say, this is what we're looking for, and anything else that has been done.
And I'll see David on Friday for the end.
And the other thing I would ask is, if I found one of the people in this area and asked them, what's the level of communication you've had from Harwich or CDM Smith on this project? How informed are you? What have you gotten, and how did you get it? What is their level of understanding? Because if it's pretty low, we've got a lot of work to do. But if they're like the people who attended last night's meeting, I'd say fairly well informed and interested and enthusiastic, at least to learn more. Where are we in terms of communicating with the individual homeowner?
And on Chris's note, in the CDM contract, I'd like to know, without ripping the whole contract, about what are their specific duties in terms of relation to the neighborhood. You know, every engineering firm who takes on a project has a different approach to their liaisons, and it's all bid out and everything else. So specifically, so we'll know what they expect to do, so we
Know
don't
what
try
we
to
need to do.
duplicate it. And along that line, I heard Michael Guadici, who I'm sure I'm ruining his name, mention that they would probably have another public meeting in about 2 years, you know, so right before the construction. So I would like to know specifically what are their duties in relation, not in relation to the design, in relation to the neighborhood, and what is, same as Chris said, what is their plan for what past communication has been done, and what's their plan for future communication.
I think we've discussed the marking the neighborhoods more specifically on the map, and I think that's something that needs to go forward in terms of which ones are, shall we just call them service neighborhoods, which ones are going to be approached specifically, not within the larger map, but in the specific one, because
Little
that
bit more
defines,
detail.
that defines who we're talking to. And two other things. One is that, I'm just going to throw this out, it needs to be validated, but many of the federal grants require a digital map. And as part of their obligation to us, we have paid them to do this work, they should be handing a digital map to us in ESRI format or one of the other two government formats. My concern, which is my third point here, is that we heard the concerned and involved members of the public last night. What we didn't hear is the people who haven't approached this at all and who are not at that meeting. And I think that sector who are not involved really needs to be investigated, because I suspect that many of them shall we say, are resisting thinking about it because of the financial issues. I don't know how we can approach that except with your approach, which is asking people in the neighborhood. And what do you do when somebody says, I don't think I want to think about it, or it's not important to me, or, you know, many people in the neighborhoods are not even at square one.
Yeah, the suggestions and ideas that have come up in this meeting and certainly last night, those are all, I don't think any of them weren't valid. They're all good. I'm looking at this from, from two ways. One, it's, over the next couple of years, as we go through these phases and so forth, and how we interact with the neighborhood and the people directly. And then if we bring it back to, we have between now and May, certain information that might be more valuable at this time to address or this to get out. So not a priority list, because that priority assumes that you're putting something more important than the other. How about an order of what you would like to do or address or get done as it leads into, and I forget the gentleman's name from last night, but there was a gentleman who said, I more than likely will vote in favor of this, but I want to have a better feeling about this, meaning
Yes,
feeling
yes.
translates into information or clarity. And so I would think these things that are on the agenda, what are things that really should be done between now and May 7th, and what can pass on into the summer, fall, and put that in an order, not priority, but in an order of maybe what could or should be done.
Immediacy.
Yes.
Immediacy is the right.
Can I just, one thing, for the committee here, I'm gonna try to I need to get that agenda ready for Tuesday. Do you wanna send me some of your ideas of what you would like on the agenda?
Well, you only have till Thursday at noon.
Right.
It's Wednesday morning,
Right, so
so
I would
I
need
think
it-
we do it right now.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a good
I
idea.
just want to add on the CDM thing, if I could. There was one comment that was made, and I've heard it made at other times, that did trouble me. And, when I very first heard about this issue in this town, it was the days of the task force and Frank Sampson and presentations at town meeting and Board of Selectmen's meeting. And we got so sick of hearing the word adaptable, but we don't hear it anymore, So when I heard last night somebody saying, well, the reason that the town has 2 years and you have 1 year is because it's in a 5-year window, and we decided it was gonna be 8 phases in exactly 5 years, and that's how it's divided up. I mean, that was just one example in the last 6 months of things that I've heard referred to in the CWMP as firm, like the $20 million, for instance, But I think this committee has an obligation, particularly in its relationship with the neighborhoods, to remind both our engineering firm, our administration, our Board of Selectmen, and the town, that this is their plan. This is an adaptable plan, so let's not let any rigidity get into it, so.
All right,
Get
what are
off
your
my
ideas for the
soapbox.
agenda for next Tuesday?
Neighborhood map. Communications with the homeowners in this to-be-sewered area.
Specifically, just,
Have they gotten a postcard? Has someone knocked on their door? Do they get a flyer? Do they have any formal communication from the town of Harwich?
all right, and you want to find out how we're doing this, or is somebody going to go out and,
What have we done to this point in terms
Okay.
of communicating? Has it been all on the homeowner's part to contact us, or have we done a good job of reaching out to them?
all right,
So that would be a question from you to Dave, gotcha.
yeah.
I don't think we're gonna have better than these maps for a few weeks, so I think we're gonna have to work with them, unless somebody else has a source that I don't know of. I think this is what we have for a few weeks.
Okay.
All right, can we get a larger one of those then?
I don't know, I got this at town meeting, this was what was put on the chairs, given out at town
Can
meeting.
you find out, like I said, I don't think we communicate. Yeah,
We've had larger ones.
But they weren't more detailed.
Right.
yeah.
More detailed, just larger.
And the other thing is, we talked about getting an alpha list of the streets, that would help us, and I don't know how we would get that. An alphabetical list of the streets in phase 2. Just a thought.
All right, so you're
So,
right.
I mean, I wanna talk about the neighborhood and divide and update, Chris, but I don't know how we do it with this map. at this point.
All right, so on your agenda item is going to depend on whether we get Dave here.
I'll try to follow up on that.
All right, do you know when you would, should I put this on the agenda as tentative? CDM's, or Dave Young?
This is Wednesday, give me the date.
Pardon?
Give me the date. Don't post it until tomorrow.
No, I won't. Yeah,
Then I'll get back to you.
all right, all right. All right. Do you have any
The survey,
survey? Again, that's going to be a Dave Young or Chris.
Dave Young, I think.
Doesn't matter, it has to go through Chris to get Dave Young, so you can sign it to Chris and slash Dave Young.
All right,
Chris said he won't be here next Tuesday, so.
right, but I'm saying he's the one that I think has to ask.
He's the one that has to ask Dave Young.
Yeah. All right.
Since we're kind of waiting for things and we have a meeting, I mean, we'll have some housekeeping to do if we have 5 members and things like that. But maybe we should talk about some of the other more housekeeping things, like look at our own website and get that out of the way and decide what documents we want to add to it or not. Maybe we should look at the 2-page spread of the sewer regs. I mean, I'm just trying to think of the order of things. There's a lot of things we're waiting for that we don't think we'll probably have till the end of the month.
Do we have a copy of the presentation he made, the PowerPoint from last night?
No, that has to, I don't know how, I know Chris said that,
They'll provide that, I'm sure, that's not a problem.
I have one, I mean, a printout that they gave out.
we're talking about like a PowerPoint. They were supposed to,
This is
Maybe
just
that's
as good.
premature. We have,
Yeah, I have one if somebody can copy it.
yeah, I didn't get a copy
We'll
of
get
that.
a signed copy, that won't be a problem.
all right. All right, we can do the website, we can do the officers.
Oh, we don't have to, just,
Yeah, and then we could, if we can get Dave Young here, then some of these other things, the survey, unless, Larry, if in fact we can get Dave Young here, can you ask him that this is the stuff we're interested in? Not that we get him here and have to ask him, and then he has to get back to us. Since you know what we're after, or looking for, that he would know that ahead of time. All right. All right. Anything else?
I think maybe some nominations of these neighborhood liaisons.
That's too soon. It's too soon for that.
Too soon for that?
Because we don't really have the full layout.
Well, all right, he's talked about Barbara. I mean, if we can, I don't know how we go about this. Do we ask them to be a formal liaison? Like you talked about, Barbara? You
I don't think we can have them be formal, but can I suggest one, sort of an overarching for that? Can we put together our own begin putting together our own expanded list of questions and answers? Maybe we can launch it at the next meeting, and then the liaisons that we know of can add information to that, and individual neighborhoods, as we find liaisons, will be able to supplement with their specific questions. So it's an ongoing list of questions that will eventually probably go on our website.
All right, so then any of us on the committee that would have those questions?
well, I would tie it in maybe with, I'm gonna send my notes to Chris Harlow. I don't know if anybody else had notes from last night, but certainly we need then to discuss. I don't know if Chris can send it back to us and we don't comment, or give it out that day. That's good enough too. If we can then use that as one of the points for questions.
And any of the additional points, because I know Dan Pelletier always has really good additions to that. And there was, in the past, discussion of additional questions from, pipe sizes and things like that. There was a punch list of those. I don't know where it went from the previous meetings.
Yeah,
I think you were, it was from one of the meetings maybe where you weren't even there when you were,
could be.
but
Wow, that's fast.
I'm handing out Christmas bonuses.
That's pretty fast, pretty fast action.
I'll drop that off
Geez,
for
I
Peter.
waited about
All
3
right.
weeks for mine.
yeah,
$10,000?
actually longer,
Really?
because I started in May and it went on.
Well,
Thank you, Larry.
I sent Sandy an email last night asking if we can have this so we can get the
God,
officers elected by next week.
Put Sandy on the committee. You get a lot done.
Oh, yeah, Don, let me read you something here.
Are we,
I think that's actually a pretty full agenda
Agenda,
for the
yeah,
next
yeah,
we
get-
meeting. And it's going to require a fair amount of preparation on our parts. And maybe the last thing on that list for the next meeting is a discussion of what else to add. Because,
yeah,
you know, I think we want to have this an ongoing, where each of us as individuals, you know, begins to accumulate additional
questions.
strategic, tactical, and just plain other information.
I'll add one more to that. Okay, so that's the 23rd of January. If we follow this tentative schedule we've talked about, we would actually have one more meeting before our first evening meeting. And I think we're thinking of our evening meetings as being more answering questions and gathering information from the public. And if it's questions we can't answer, we certainly take them and get them to the proper person. But on next agenda, as well as the one on the 6th, I'd like to see an item about framework or preparation for evening meetings, so we can at least have 2 times to talk about what we're gonna do.
Can I suggest, I need to go, can I suggest one other topic?
Yes.
That is, I think you guys opened this meeting by mentioning, giving an item of selectmen's meetings, whether it's once a week or once
Right.
a month or something. Maybe you start the agenda item, listing topics that you think is appropriate to start with.
Right.
You know, we're talking about very short one.
Are you talking to present at the Board of Selectmen meetings
Right.
on Monday?
Yeah.
Questions? Or,
No,
or,
info.
Info.
Information. You know, you could
The
have a
idea
first
is that we-
You've had an opening meeting, and, you know, you're looking at these
Right.
items. Very short, but it keeps it,
Yeah.
there may be a list of topics that you want to go forward.
The idea was that we were gonna take over the wastewater moment and thereby relieve the Board of Selectmen of that duty.
That'd be great.
Um,
I think the agenda item would be what's the
Right.
topics. So we
Yeah.
can put that forward.
So wastewater moment. And then we can figure out who does them and when and,
Okay.
Thank you, Larry.
We'll get you over on that.
all right, all right.
So we're gonna have a lot of meetings to have to go to.
Yeah.
Actually, though, are you done yet? I need to
All right,
share-
so,
I need to share a phone call.
no, wait, do we, is there anything else? And if not, we can,
Shall we adjourn the meeting? I move
So
we
is it-
adjourn
Yeah.
the meeting. Second,
Second,
we're adjourned.
we're adjourned.
I got a phone message,